Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 72 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Nashville Predators, in which the Sharks have lost 1-0 in overtime. So the Sharks have now played their 3 games against the Predators this season. They've lost all 3 of them, and they've managed to score a combined 1 goal in those 3 games. So clearly Nashville seems to have the Sharks numbered, and even though this one appeared very close on the scoreboard, the Sharks still managed to even get the singular point for the overtime loss. It was not particularly unclear which of these 2 teams were better here tonight. Nashville far and away the better team, and the Sharks, the only reason they managed the single point was because of the heroics of their goaltender Kaapo Kähkönen, who I will get to a bit later. But going into this game, the first period was Nashville dominated, or at least tilted towards the Predators, but no goals, and so we'd head into the second period tied at 0. The second was even more Nashville favored. It should be noted that the Sharks did get a few chances here or there, certainly a couple nice little breakaways that were sort of interruptions between Nashville periods of offensive zone time, but that was really the only upside for the San Jose Sharks. Otherwise, the Predators were just firing shot after shot after shot towards the net, and yet, besides a goal that ended up getting called off on the offside, the game was still tied at 0. The third period, I thought, was actually better played by the Sharks. It definitely felt a lot more even in that third period, and I wouldn't say you could make the argument that the Sharks were better, but like I said, you could make the argument that they were about equal with the Predators, and yet still 0 goals in that third period. Both goaltenders had to make some marvelous saves, and so we would head to the overtime. The Sharks, as of late in overtime, haven't been particularly good, and I guess you could say that continues here. The Sharks felt very uncomfortable in a lot of these 3-on-3 type situations, and eventually it is Mattias Ekholm who will put it away for the Nashville Predators to get them the 1-0 lead, and the Sharks now lose 7 games in a row. That does, of course, include a couple of overtime losses, so it is not 7 games in a row in which the Sharks have gotten no points, but still, at the very least, they haven't really been able to celebrate a victory in a long time. On to the players to talk about. We have at first the Chmelevski, Couture, Meier line, and I think the major interesting thing here to talk about the Sharks lineup is that about halfway or so through this game, the Sharks did go for a bit of a change. Meier was actually put back with Hertl and Barabanov, and Balcers was moved to Couture and Chmelevski's line, just because the Sharks were obviously trying to find some offense that just wasn't there. And so what's interestingly enough about this is that when Barabanov, Hertl, and Meier were put together, the line didn't honestly do much of anything. It just didn't really get anything rolling and found themselves in the defensive zone a lot. On the other hand, the surprise here I felt was that the Chmelevski, Couture, Balcers line actually did get something rolling and was probably the Sharks' best line at the very least in that third period. We're getting some very good chances. Couture in particular I thought stood out in a very positive light. Balcers had a couple of breakaways just in this game. Chmelevski is kind of in an interesting spot because I felt as though if he just had like a bit more skill in his game, if he was just a bit more used to playing at the NHL level, there could have been a couple more chances for the Sharks, because there were a few times where he ends up getting the puck in a dangerous position, but he just sort of can't control it, is unable to make the smart pass, and so it kind of would die on his stick a couple of times. But still, you do still have to give him some credit for being such an inexperienced player, but still managing to make up the Sharks' best line, like I said, in this third period. So that was definitely nice to see. When it comes to the Sharks' third line of Gregor, Bonino, and Nieto, this may have been the Sharks' general best line if we're counting all 3 of the periods. Gregor had 2 or 3 different breakaways in this game, so it's nice to see that he's back. I mentioned in the previous game that he had gone a while not really getting those breakaway opportunities like he had been earlier on this season, but it seems as though he's back with that. And then both Bonino and Nieto not being dead weight on this line, which is actually a change of pace from earlier on in this season. They actually did get a couple of good chances, and while generally they were still playing in the defensive zone a lot, that is more so a comment on how the entire Sharks team played, and when you compare them to the other lines, they were relatively the best one, like I said. When it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, honestly, we didn't really see much of them. There was exactly one good play coming from the Sharks' fourth line, and that was mostly just orchestrated by Erik Karlsson making a good pass to Dahlin, who would then feed it over to Viel, who'd kind of just sort of not really take that great of a shot, and it would be a pretty easy save from Saros. But otherwise, this fourth line basically got zero ice time, didn't necessarily do much of anything, and there isn't really anything to write home about it either. On the defensive side of things, we start off with the Sharks' first defensive pairing, and in particular, of course, Brent Burns, who had strung together so many fantastic games during this Sharks losing streak, but it does come to an end here, I would say, tonight. Brent Burns struggled mightily. A lot of times he was just so heavily pressured by the Nashville Predators forecheckers, and that is basically Burns' major weakness, which is probably not a good thing to have as a major weakness, but nonetheless, this was his major weakness, and Brent Burns was pressured so much that he ended up making some really bad passes, taking some really bad icings, giving pucks away in front of the net, and generally it was not a very successful game for Brent Burns. On the second pairing, the other defenseman, of course, to talk about would be Erik Karlsson, who also did not have a particularly successful game. There were a couple of offensive plays, but Erik Karlsson got caught flat-footed a couple of times, got caught in bad positions, was making some bad passes, was pressured way too easily at times as well in the defensive zone, which led to some bad giveaways. And then, of course, on the game-winning goal, you also have to sort of put a lot of blame onto Erik Karlsson, who, it's not unheard of that he's going to make this play, because it just seems like a very Erik Karlsson style of play, where instead of actually playing the man, trying to stop Ekholm from being able to push this puck in past Kähkönen and winning the game, but, maybe not necessarily getting the puck back in possession of the Sharks, Karlsson decides to go for more of the 50-50 play, where, yes, there's a chance it goes by him and Ekholm scores, but there's a chance that he's able to pick off the pass, control it, and then send a player forward for the Sharks on a potential overtime breakaway. This is just, classic Erik Karlsson, for better or for worse. This is the exact play that you would expect him to make in this type of situation, and this time the coin landed on tails. The 50-50 play did not work. The pass made its way through Karlsson. Ekholm was able to put it in. So it's just it's a bit of an awkward play to criticize, I guess you could say, because, of course, if we were to remove the 5 off of Erik Karlsson's jersey, and as such it would have been number 6, Ryan Merkley, in this particular position, if he did that, he probably wouldn't play a game for the rest of this season, because Bob Booner would just send him down to the minors himself. But since it's Erik Karlsson, it is, for whatever reason, a bit more well understood that that's exactly what's going to happen, so it's not really viewed as a huge problem, even if maybe it should be, especially in a situation like that. When it comes to the Sharks' third pairing, this has just kind of been disastrous as a whole for the San Jose Sharks over the past few games. With the games where Merkley plays, there is at the very least a chance that the third pairing does something, but it seems as though the past 3 or 4 times that Miloš has come back in and paired up with Vlasic, it's just been absolutely disastrous. In particular, I thought Vlasic this game was just completely awful. There was this one play where he goes for a change at the most inopportune time, where there's absolutely zero way he can pull off that change, and then he's completely unaware of the play going on behind him. Luckily, the Predators did not actually end up scoring on that odd man rush because of Vlasic's terrible change, but still, he also had this awful giveaway from behind the net where he just passes this one right in front of his own net with zero vision of any particular Sharks player who could actually pick up the pass, and it goes straight to, I believe it was Philip Forsberg, who is probably not the Predators player you do want to just give a no-look pass to in your own defensive zone. So generally, Vlasic really did struggle this game, and honestly, it just felt as though all 3 pairings for the Sharks just could not really do anything in this game. When it comes to the goaltender, here was the one positive for the Sharks. Kaapo Kähkönen, since arriving to San Jose from the Minnesota Wild, has had a couple of pretty good games, a couple of not particularly good games, but here tonight was likely his best performance. He really did his best to get the Sharks the single point here tonight, and he really tried to get them the 2 points, but at a point, you make 40 saves, was unable to make that 41st one, and the Sharks just doing him no favors offensively or honestly even defensively. So Kähkönen definitely played well here tonight, but in the end is unfortunately going to be counted as the loser. And so Kähkönen continues in his quest to search for his first win as a San Jose Shark. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday, where they will take on the Chicago Blackhawks. Honestly, I didn't even remember that the Sharks have played the Blackhawks at a point this season, but they have. All the way back in November, the Sharks managed to defeat the Blackhawks by a score of 2-0. So clearly a rather uneventful game, but the Sharks will play the Blackhawks twice in their last 10 games of the season, and we'll see if the Sharks can at the very least break out of this losing streak. Class dismissed.